Why would a nation rise and fall? Why would everything appear to have that kind of cycle to it? The rise of a civilization, the rise of a business, the rise of whatever it is. And you think this feedback loop, this cycle, this event, it's just going to go on forever. But eventually, it appears not to be the strongest expression of productivity. Or the strongest expression of self-organization. And that would be why things rise and fall. Self-organization. If you have a world, if you have a universe, and all the rules are super consistent, if you think about the idea of determinism, one state leading to the next state, and the only way we know that determinism isn't a reality is through quantum mechanics at a level that's like, it has no bearing on our life. We know the world might be random, but in the day-to-day instance, everything follows a perceivably deterministic routing, right? Events A lead to events B. There's no, because this atom vanished for a second and appeared over here randomly, this chemical connection didn't work out the way it should have, and then this event turned differently than we would have expected. No, it's always predictable at the highest level, even if at the lowest level it's like absolute chaos and scattered to the wind mechanics of how reality is functioning. Why gravity doesn't persist at that level in the same manner, why it changes its form altogether into something else. Quantum gravity, I think I've heard it described. It's no longer on the proposition of a whole bunch of mass in a position. It's more about the wave fields, I guess, at that level of at that scale of the universe. I guess everything just, yeah. But determinism, the idea of event A leading to event B. If you take randomness out of the equation, then what's happening with every iteration of the universe? When state A evolves into state B and state B evolves into state C, you're witnessing the rules. So let's talk about equations. Let's talk about mathematical equations for a second. There are some equations that are just so obvious. 1 + 1 = 2. The time it takes for me to walk from this point to this point, divide against the length, tells you the speed I was traveling. There's some like mathematical ideas that are just so straightforward that they have no misinterpretation. However, when you're trying to do a large analysis of reality, you're trying to make a rocket go to the moon, for instance, then everything falls apart. Then there's just so many equations you have to mash together. Like, there's no one equation that just gets you to the end result. You have to pick apart reality, all the different aspects of physics, and work through them one by one. Like, it's not 3 + 3 = 6. It's like, if we go up at this angle, at this speed, like, this is the amount of resistance we're facing with the rocket, the weight trying to pull back to Earth, the fuel we're going to need, the time it will take to reach orbit, how much fuel will be burnt, at what trajectory will reach orbit. It's like, soon, the simple idea of reality, it can't be expressed in one equation. You have to have so many extra dissections of physics to make it work. But what's dissecting physics like that? How can that be how can 1 plus 1 equal 2, right? 2 plus 2 equal 4. Gravity works a certain way. The acceleration of the rocket is determined on the weight of the rocket and the weight of gravity, or the resistance leaving the atmosphere, leaving the Earth, the pole. Why can't there just be one equation that explains all that? Why do you have to be like, oh, this, if you're running on ice, then it gets, like you try to stop, you're going to slide, but if you're not running on ice, if you're just walking on ice, the conditions are different. You're not going to slide. Like, we break reality up into all these different logical arguments about why anything makes sense. Okay. So what's all that rambling mean? What does that really mean? If you have to break reality up into all these different segments, if there isn't one equation that just leads to the answer, if the world is deterministic, if everything goes from state A to state B to state C, and sometimes it's obvious, I hand you $1, you have $1, and sometimes it's not obvious, where there's ice on the road, there's humidity in the air, there's a car driving down the street, there's how heavy the car is, and then you make all these determinations and you're like, well, this is what will happen. Yeah, the extra steps, the extra thinking. I guess it just points to the idea that reality has a whole bunch of rules, right? Isn't that what I'm trying to say? The world has rules, right? There's tons of rules, but they influence each other. So I guess I'm trying to say that it seems like the world has tons of rules. It seemingly has tons of rules. And yet, they influence each other. So what I'm trying to say is, like, you try to do something and you gotta consider all the extra factors about the situation. Extra factors that have different rules. Like, if I give you an apple, you have an apple. If you run on ice, the speed, the landing of your foot against the ice, the friction, the heat of your, the shoe, all that stuff. It all plays a role in determining the outcome. And yet, it's all understandable. You're just taking ideas about, like, how strong an event is, how much you have of something, the quantity. There are these very simple ideas that are being pushed around by all these cognitive understandings. You have an apple, you don't have an apple, you have 2 apples. You see the 2 apples in your hand, you got 2 of them. If you had one more, you would have 3. But if you owed somebody an apple, you wouldn't have an apple. Like, you might have an apple in your hand, but you can't eat it because you owe it to somebody else. I guess I'm trying to say that there might be seemingly tons of rules, but there might just be one rule. There just might be one massive rule that we have to break down because we can't see mathematically a pattern that would fit all the scenarios. But we can make tons of math equations that when you string them together give you the result, but there's no intuitive math model for something that takes multiple segments of formulas. Kind of like the quadratic equation. There's some elegant ways to simplify massive problems, but then the complexity of the issue is just too much. Like, you gotta start adding in other equations. You can't find ways to blend some math with other math. You can't extend it that far. You can't create the one and done equation that fits for all of gravity or whatnot. Like, I mean, for gravity, sure, but like orbital rotations, like when you have different planets, different sizes, you just gotta start considering all the other variables. And that's where the whole segmented rules come out of the vacuum. It seems like 1 + 1 = 2 is obvious, and all the other stuff can be so unobvious. And yet it's just an extension of 1 + 1 = 2. It's just a large extension of all the mathematical concepts that you need to differentiate all the rules of reality. Friction, ice, humidity, temperature, and yeah. So rise and fall of stuff. Why would that happen? Why would that happen? How can mathematics be so segmented and yet, all pointing to the same reality? How do you need so many formulas to point to reality, and yet some rules feel isolated? Like, all the rules fit together, but all of them feel understandable because they're isolated, and when you need to make a determination on reality, you fit all the formulas you need into one spot, and then you do the thing. You do the calculation. But you couldn't do it off one of those understandings. They all have to come together. So, if that's the case, if all the understandings have to come together to make reality, if you observe one thing, you observe another thing, and then you find some elegant way to put the two observations together, and you can't merge them, but you can relate them so that you can keep moving forward. You can understand it as a different rule or something, or a rising pattern of rule that happens and blah, blah, blah. Oh God, we're getting so convoluted here. I guess my observation is this. The idea that there are many rules is probably false. There's probably just one rule. There's one super rule. And that super pattern is what makes the fractal universe. Now we're jumping ahead. So you have a world, you have a universe, and it's all being smashed together under the same consistent rules from moment to moment. You have quantum physics saying that, okay, underneath all that, there's such a randomness that, like, not even that exists. Not even the ball falling out of my hand and landing on the floor. Like, that didn't even happen. In the quantum universe, so many different ways that could have taken place. And you didn't witness it, so you don't know the ball fell out of my hand and hit the floor. Like, randomness in the universe, but also determinism in the universe. Right. So, if there is a universe, and it has all these rules, but they're all one rule, and there's no chaos, there's no observable chaos, you're just going to say, yeah, quantum physics exists, but it has no bearing on reality as far as we can tell. In what way it relates to reality, a deeper mystic conversation to be had there. But in the manner that the world presents itself, in the idea that all rules are the same, then determinism is its nature. It's the nature of all the ideas within the system. If you have rules and they all combine into one rule ultimately, like they all have to be, configured together to make your understanding of reality real, then there's consistency. And that's the whole idea of physics, is that there is consistency. This isn't a random universe, at least from the point of view of the macroscopic scale. How it happens on the lower scale probably influences the macroscopic, but yeah, there would be consistency there too. There would have to be, right? The idea is that there would have to be some underlying supreme, consistent rule of the universe, or none of it would make sense. Like, that's the idea. We're witnessing something, and it has some kind of logic to it, So it has to exist. Or there has to be some kind of deep underlying, like, truth. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. There has to be some kind of truth to it all. A reason for every part of reality that you witness. So, you have your universe, you have the randomness of it all, and then you have the deterministic outer side, the shell that you witness, the everything is big, macro, following patterns. And you know that quantum physics barely affects your life, or at least it seems like you could say that it does, but at the same time, if you drop your phone will hit the ground. Like, randomness won't change the outcome. So, even if you believe in determinism, or you believe in quantum physics, like the randomness is there, particles are all over the place, it doesn't change the fact that reality manifests this way, that you are, that gravity doesn't change its universal constant at a moment's notice. It's not like, yeah. If the laws of physics don't change on the macroscopic scale due to the microscopic scale, then nothing is really, it's all accounted for. Understanding that the lower universe is random doesn't change the strange deterministic feel on the outer side. Like, they've always existed together. So you just have to think that however that randomness manifests, it still leads to some kind of complete universe. I have my own view on why that happens. I have my own super incredible, like, backwards mystic view about why all that happens, but let's take the universe in the deterministic form as it is. You have your universe, you have your state, and then it goes into another state. And it goes into another state because of all the rules. And if you think about determinism, there's a very specific way everything moves. Like, everything has that kind of purpose. So, like, yeah, I wake up today, I feel like making this recording. Like, the way it plays out, it's all determined state by state. And that means it's uneven. That just means it's uneven. Here's what really makes me feel like. If the world is deterministic in the very upfront sense, then the way it plays out follows all the rules. And at that point, determinism just feels like a ball rolling down a hill. Like, you put a ball on top of a hill on a slant, like you put it on the side, on the slope, and you're holding it there, and you have to hold it there because the moment you let go, it's going to roll down the hill. Yeah, in that moment, you spend energy keeping the ball there. You've had food, you have to be not going to fall asleep, you have to hold the ball there. I guess you could sleep on top of the ball, but basically you're holding it there, and eventually, say you let go, and it rolls down the hill. Well, think about everything in reality having that same principle. Everything is unbalanced. Everything has a natural momentum, a direction it's going to go. Your anger is going to manifest in, like, not wanting to be cooperative with the people that made you angry. The happiness you feel from interacting with somebody is going to make you, like, have a stronger bond with them, want to, like, interact with them more. Everything has just this natural, unbalanced, this is the next step because we're falling into it. The ball is rolling down the hill. All the various things going on in my life push me in momentum. It's uneven. This world is not finished. I don't feel like we haven't reached gradient descent. We haven't reached the optimal way the universe could be. And now we're going back to why all things rise and fall, or seemingly rise and fall, have a cycle to it. It's because everything is unbalanced. It's because the whole world is unbalanced. The whole universe is unbalanced. And it's all trending towards efficiency. The ball is going to roll fastest if the slope is more extreme, but like eventually the ball hits the end of the hill. Eventually there is no more hill to roll down. And that's a very simple expression, but think about all of reality that way. But yeah, like a ball rolling down a hill. Except there's so many complex factors driving this ball. So it's not really rolling down a hill. It's like moving around in a space. Have you ever seen those probability state like weather things where it's like they show you a graph and they show you like a point. It represents humidity and like the temperature and whether it rained or not. And then they show you it evolving over time, and it's that whole butterfly effect. Like if there's one square of the graph that represents a rainy day and there's another square that represents a sunny day, and like it needs this much humidity or this much temperature, you'll see the point, the graph evolve in a way where the thing will circle. The state of the system on that graph will go around in a spiral, and then it will spiral from one square that represents one state into the other square that represents the other state. This is where like AI is going with like trying to predict the future kind of stuff. It's like if you give all these variables to the machine, it can be like, oh, we're trending towards a rainy day. We're trending towards a dry, sunny day. And these are the factors. Like you can watch the thing spiral on the graph and be like, oh, we're getting really close to having a sunny day. And then the spiral goes over there and spirals a few times in the sunny day square. And then it goes back into the rainy day square in this weird, you look at the graph and you're like, I see it being pulled over there. So it's like you gather all the factors that make the scenario and you plot it out on a graph and you watch the state of the system go back and forth between all the various different ways it could be, rainy or sunny. But you also see when you have all the factors on a graph, when you have like humidity and dryness and blah, 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 you can basically see it. You're like, oh, it's about to be a sunny day. It looks like it's about to roll over into the sunny period, or it's about to go into the rainy period. Like I see the state of the graph moving closer and closer to the axis, like it's getting closer to flopping over onto the other side. And that's just like the rocket science. Weather is so much harder to predict. Rocket science is basically we have all the factors we need. The gravity, the earth, the weather. Like we know when we're going to launch the rocket, how much fuel it will have. And then the weather scenario is kind of like, this is all the science we have to explain why the events occur this way. It's a rainy day because the barometer dropped and weather patterns changed and the humidity over the ocean moved over this land mass. But unlike the rocket, there's just variables that we don't have. All the things that influence the weather. Like trying to go to the moon versus trying to predict the weather. The moon is an achievable thing. The weather is like, what influences it? This is a really deep question about what influences the weather. Everything influences it. Even a person walking down the street, fucking breathing in and out changes the weather at a microscopic scale. So when you add it all up, it's like, what factors, like what trace factor, what 0.05% factor have we missed that changes what the weather will be like today? And that's the thing. It's like, it's such a precise thing. Like launching the rocket can be precise, but that's a invented question by us. We're like, can we launch the rocket to the moon? Yes, we could. Can we predict the weather? Can we understand all the variables that make the weather? It's like, no, we can't. We can get really fucking close, but like at the end of the day, 99.999 is still not 100. So, and we're not even close like that. But yet you can launch the rocket and land on a place on the moon with pretty much a lot of precision. Because there's less factors, I guess. I don't know. So, determinism and the universe and the rise and fall of things. If you've listened to this ramble this long, generally what I'm trying to say is the unevenness of the universe propels itself into a more even state. There's basically like self-organization going on that leads to more effective patterns. And some patterns are not that effective. They come crashing down after a period of time because they don't account for everything else. So, like the weather example. The guy walking down the street, breathing in and out, having a 0.001% effect on the weather, and the 4,000, the 5,000, the 30,000 people in the city all adding up to be this trace effect on the weather, but no one's going to put it in the model. No one's going to be like, population size 400,000 here, and that creates this weather effect. Like, no one's doing that. Maybe they are, but it's like, these are all these variables that could be thrown into the system, but they're not. So, that's reality. That's reality. You have all these ideas in a system, and they all influence each other. Like the weather example. And they influence each other in the most absurd ways because it's all interconnected. Ultimately, the idea of physics and the idea of the real universe is that the energy that manifests, the energy that animates everything is ubiquitous. It's uniform. It's the same. The energy in the object I'm holding and the energy in the sun are just different magnitudes of the same energy, configured into different molecules, different atoms, but you can measure us. You could measure me, and you can measure a part of the sun or the whole sun and be like, Gregory is, I don't know, trillions of times less energy than the sun or something. But you can do that. You can basically equate everything to everything. Why is that? Because the world is built in itself. We're observing the rules, but it's all interconnected so deeply. Like, that whole idea that we're stardust. The idea that, like, all the materials in the world come from, clouds of gas, forming stars, getting super dense, creating new atoms that could only exist at that density and that pressure or whatever, supernovas away into all these different materials. And then one day, all the different planets in the universe, probably like the chemical reactions, they self-organize into something, and then you get life. Right. So what I'm trying to say is, like, it's like the weather. If everything could be that fucking interlinked, if everything really is so interlinked, then you're never going to find the answer to anything. Because just go back to the idea what I was saying before. You have the quadratic equation, you have like all these formulas, and you have to mash them together to get the answer you want. Because they're all true, but they're not the whole truth. Right? They're not the whole truth. And that's just where we're at. We don't know the whole truth of everything. You can make a weather model so super good, but then you forget to include the people. You forget to include all the various things that aren't a part of weather science, but are a part of weather science, because all sciences merge together. All phenomenon, it's all interlinked. There's no difference in the phenomenons going on. That's what I'm trying to say. All the rules are interconnected. One rule that says this can be totally skewed under something else. It's like, when is water going to freeze? Depends on the pressure of the environment that's freezing within. The temperature of freezing can change depending on the pressure. So, hard and fast rules that look like they stay the same, but then get manipulated by all the other aspects. And it's like, sometimes it's obvious what's manipulating it, but most times it can't be obvious. because it's 100% manipulated by everything else around it. If all energy can be measured against itself, then the way that it's manifesting and the way that it interacts, like, even if something can't interact with something, like a rock, like, oh, this rock, it can't interact with me. It's neutral. It's dead as it comes. It has no chemical reaction to me. It can't do anything more. Like, even the rock it could interact with me. Like, even the rock is like a product of reality. Like, it may seem like I can't interact with it, but it's in the same like system that I'm in. Right. The same system. I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't escape reality. You know, all of reality, all of its rules are influencing everything within the system. It's only moments when you say 1 + 1 = 2 that you can be like, I understand the universe. But no, you don't, because then eventually you have to put 1 + 1 = 2 alongside with all the other formulas. Whenever you're doing anything, you might be like, oh, you have one apple. I see it in your hand. You're like, I don't have an apple. This apple, I owe it to my neighbor. Like, I gotta give this apple away. I don't have an apple. I can't eat it. It's not mine. Like, what kind of crazy rule is that? From one person's point of view, you have one apple. The other person has the apple, and he's saying he doesn't have the apple. So, if all rules are interconnected that deeply, then why would things rise and fall? Because of the unevenness. It would literally just be a result, like letting a ball fall down a hill. It'd be like, oh, this country decided to tax its people 100% of its wealth. And it's like, gee, I wonder what could happen to a country that does that. It's like, sure, the ball going down the hill seems obvious. Taxing the people 100% seems like it obviously... I don't know, people in the society probably wouldn't agree to that. They wonder where the money is going. They feel like, I can't even live day to day. What are you going to do? Is there going to be food line? Like, what are you going to do to make this doable? So, yeah. The rise and fall. It's just because everything is uneven. The ball will roll down the hill until there's no more hill to roll down. The nation could tax 100% of the income of the people until they start self-organizing and questioning the government more and more, becoming super critical of it. Like, everything will come to an end. Everything is an unnatural, like, everything is imbalanced. Everything is unbalanced. And it's headed towards balance. But there's so many factors, there's so many variables, that's not just a ball rolling down a hill. It's like a ball rolling down a roller coaster ride or something. Or, yeah. Okay. So what else would I say? I would just say that, like, rise and fall is just the result of a universe that's so... all of the rules are made. All the rules and how they interact, they're all set beforehand. All the universal constants, they're all there. Like, the iron atom, like, even when the universe couldn't form an iron atom, like, the rules, the fucking idea of why an iron atom could exist, like, it was there. It was already there in the framework of the universe, why iron atoms could exist even before there was a star that can make an iron atom. Like, everything has cause and, like, effect. Everything is, like, driven by some universal series of rules, some constants that keep everything moving forward. Under the framework that we know it to. Yeah. So rise and fall of stuff is just like a ball rolling down a hill. It's like the natural unbalanced nature of the universe leading to balance. But in the process of leading to balance, in the process of things being like having potential energy, being like, oh, this is a really unstable environment, I can go in 5 different directions. But then eventually it's like, after so many iterations of that, it's like things stabilize, things self-organize. All those rules, all the rules that make the world consistent, they all are forcing the universe into a state of order. Like, that's where we're headed. Some kind of grand state of order. I guess, like, entropy, the idea of everything becoming less and less potentially reactive to everything else. Like, the evening out of energy everywhere so that, like, even a rock can't roll down a hill anymore is, like, the destined end state of the universe. But as you move towards that end state, you're basically saying, like, everything is burning off energy. Like, all the randomness, or all the unevenness, it's all following the state of the rules, and it burns up the energy. It keeps going towards gradient descent. The absolute everything is even, nothing can happen anymore kind of state. Okay, so why does that make rise and fall like a reality? Like, why would that be the case? It's just because, unbalanced stuff looks like it's in motion, and then it stops. Like, the ball rolling down a hill will eventually stop. Like a government that taxes all the money out of the population, like that would never work. It would eventually crash and burn. And, well, that'd be that. Okay, so I started by, like, asking why rise and fall happens. And I think I've explained, like, why I think it happens. It's just determinism. It's all the different rules converging to force the universe out of an unbalanced position into a more balanced position. And that balance, it comes from, that the balance we're headed towards, it produces a lot of reality. It animates an entire story. So you have, for instance, so human society, right? You have all these city-states, early proto-republics. You got migrational, like, people. You got, like, the nomadic people moving around. The rise and fall of, like, say, a religious society, right? It would come about because of the people's need to gain order over the fucking collective elitists who took over the cities. Like, eventually, city-states were captured by other warlords. People who had gained influence in other cities took over those cities, amassed armies, and then took over other cities. So early humanity, like the early city-states, like Mesopotamia, Babylon, there was a lot of, like, civil wars and just, man, death and destruction. So eventually, religion becomes important. Like, society, humanity, it can only deal with that for so long until it's like, we need ethical leaders. We need people who actually have a moral code. Like, collectively, we all believe this. Oh, you don't act like you believe this? You're a heathen. Get him out of here. Like, it was a defense response against all the fucking madmen who were terrorizing society in the beginning. It's like, we don't understand anything about this universe. We have these, like, ideas about how it's beautiful and blah, blah, blah. And here's our religion. It's forming. Like, here's the stories. And now you guys have to fucking, like, you gotta follow it. Like, these cities are convinced. Like, cities start to become cults because life is so bad. You have all this fucking insanity with warlords and crazy people, just, like, power-hungry monsters taking over the world and having to live through that. So the idea of a order, a balance, a religious way to live, like, that comes about just to protect people from the tyranny of monarchs, of warlords. And even these early republics, like city-states, like they're not free. These societies weren't like, yeah, they weren't liberty focused. No. They had slaves. Like all ancient societies basically participated in slavery. So, yeah, not so good. But the point is, like, the rise and fall of stuff comes from the imbalance in everything. The like forces leading to balance, I would say, create the rise and fall of stuff. You had yeah. What else is there even to say here? This is really, like, all over the place for sure. The rise and fall of, like, well, no. Okay, I guess the next thing I would say is, like, that's all there is to say. Okay. Just listen to my whole ramble podcast, and just want to say that I'm not like, I don't really know. The religious society aspect comes about for many different reasons, but, like, yeah. Rise and fall of stuff, cause and effect. That was just an example that popped to mind. There's many reasons for everything forming in the universe, but the warlords conquering other cities and people kind of arranging themselves into, like, well, early religions, like arranging how they view the world. Like, I imagine it's sort of a response to all the nobility and how they manipulated society, or maybe that was nobility creating their own, like, norms so that they could justify their rule over society. I don't know which. Oh, I just realized that rock, the rock that's chemically inert, has no effect on my life. It does. It influences me with gravity. The rock has a gravitational pull over me, even if it's really, minute. And that's just it. Like, everything in reality is interacting with other aspects of reality on some level. When it reaches a level of energy in magnitude, it will have effect. So, yeah, so even the rock sitting on the ground is pulling on me in a gravitational sense. And it goes back to the rocket and the weather situation. The rocket is the question we ask of ourselves, and the weather is, like, what's the reality of the world? Like, how's it actually forming? And just like the rock pulling on me, or the person breathing in and out on the street, has effect over everything. Everything has effect over everything. It's all interlinked in ways that are like, oh, I didn't even realize this was happening. So, yeah, at this point, I'm basically done. I don't have anything else to say. I'm just adding on to the video, the podcast, just to see if there's anything else I can elaborate on. I've been thinking of, so earlier I used, I'm a coder. I code in C++. I want to make video games. And the idea of this simulator, or the idea of a world that self-organizes into better and better patterns, it would make sense to put into a video game. If you had a video game, a simulation, a program that didn't have randomness, and all the computer agents within it interacted with each other in a way that's always, consistent to the rules of that so-called universe, the little computer simulator, then it would follow the same rules of reality. It would self-organize into its most effective way, most effective pattern that could be formed. Just because the unbalanced, like, well, that's the other thing. If reality has all these consistent rules, then it is like you have this environment that's being weathered. It's like weather erosion. There's just all these forces that continually affect the reality around us, and it's eroding it into its most balanced form. Because everything that's unbalanced, like I was saying before, it falls. It picks up momentum in the way that it influences reality around it until it burns up, like until other forces arise or it has no more momentum. Yeah. I guess that's really it.